Hello, I'm Professor Lieu. Welcome to our live stream. I'm joined today by art prof teaching artist Alex Rowe. And today we are critiquing your artwork. We have two sculptures. One is by Anthony Zhang, and the second is by Moisés E. Lozano. If you would like to grow as an artist and you can't afford an art class, we've got everything you need here at Art Prof: critiques, tutorials, and professional development. We're going to start out with this mixed media piece by Moisés E. Lozano. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, who I believe is here live with us in the chat, which is fantastic because then we can have more of a dialogue. And so this is a piece titled Summer Razor. And it's created out of all different types of materials. And I just want to give you guys a little bit of information on Moisés's artist statement, which, by the way, is also in the video description below. So Moisés is from Canada. He completed a General Arts and Sciences Intro to Fine Art program at Algonquin College. And so Summer Razor, the piece you're looking at here, he says it was conceived for an unreleased short film by Lowbrow Productions. The meticulous crafting proved to be a character study of the film's protagonist. And Moisés explains, I was chasing this idea of capturing the feeling of anxiety using matchsticks came quite spontaneously during the pre-production. And scriptwriter on the film and dear friend Mark Templin was moved by rejecting artificial order manufactured law. Quote, suburban picket fences feel more like bars on a jail cell ready to go out in flames. You can read the whole thing yourself in the video description. So Alex, let's get some first reactions. We have a little bit of the artist statement to go on and also these photos and some process images for later on.
Yeah, I think right off the bat, I'm struck by its role in the film and questions I have about that as they're phrased in the artist statement. Mostly I'm concerned or curious about whether this piece was a prop for the film or if it was meant to be included or the creation of it was an aspect of the film. That's just something that I'm very curious about as it's brought up in the statement. And I'm not sure how to critique this piece as either a sculpture or as a part of the larger project.
I think it brings up questions about what do you choose to share when you present your work? Because I'll tell you, Moisés, when Alex and I were reading the statement, we were just confused. We could not figure out if this was a design to help generate ideas. We couldn't tell if it was actually in the film, or maybe it was inspiration that helped develop a character. Like, we couldn't figure out where in the process of making a film this piece belonged. And so I guess what I'm thinking is, I don't know, maybe it would have been better not to mention the film at all. And Moisés, you can tell us what you think in the chat, but what do you think about that, Alex? Or is that really just unfair to the piece to not mention the film?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think of the example we were talking about before the stream is like the artist who did the work for Wes Anderson movies, particularly Grand Budapest Hotel. If that artist wrote an artist statement about their work, they wouldn't do a summary of the film. They wouldn't do the concepts behind the film. They would mention only enough to explain what brought the image into being. And I think that in the artist statement, one of the traps it falls into is it's talking more about this film and the writer and not enough about the piece itself. And I think there's also some inconsistencies in the statement where on one hand it says that the use of matchsticks was accidental and that it was because they were cost effective. And then later the statement says that it was an intentional visual metaphor of the dangers of suburbia and suburban living. So I think that inconsistency is confusing.
Moisés says the art piece was for the poster for the film, so the graphic design. I fight tooth and nail to get it exposed as a standalone piece, but I wanted to honor the piece that inspired me to make it. Okay, well, I think, Moisés, it's just a matter of organizing the content that you have. Because I think the issue we had with the statement was, first of all, we couldn't tell what role the piece had in the film. And second of all, we felt like we didn't really understand where it belonged. So now you're saying it was part of a poster. I think it would have been super helpful to have seen the poster itself. Do you think that would have helped, Alex?
Oh, absolutely. And that would be so cool. I would love to see the finished poster and then supplemental images of the sculpture standalone. I think that would be super rad. And that would be a way to more accurately judge the piece. Because what I love talking and thinking about, especially with an illustration background, talking in realms of fine art, is that intention matters with it. Like if your goal with art is just to make something that's pretty, like that's it. You don't want it to be thought-provoking at all. If you say that, then your measure of success can be measured. Whereas for this piece, since it was made for the film poster, I think that's an important thing to have and to see about whether or not this piece achieved the goals it set out.
So I just want to go back to what Moses is saying, that you fought tooth and nail to get it exposed as a standalone piece. There's no reason you as the artist can't do that. And what you could do instead is in your artist statement, briefly mention the film. You could just say that the film is what got you started, but then move on very quickly, because it's like you don't want the film to take over your artist statements. Your artwork, you can choose to do what you want as long as you have an agreement with the filmmakers that that is okay in terms of copyright. Mm-hmm. Raw Nook says, I find one particular angle very sinister. The house looks evil. Is it a haunted house? An abandoned house? Well, let's go back to those images. Alex, is that the atmosphere you get, or do you feel something else?
It's funny. I'm really glad that Raw Nook said this, because my first glimpses of these, it made me think of the little miniature houses that are built in the film Hereditary, which is a terrific horror movie. And it does have that sense of foreboding. And I'm very curious with the use of matches. And it's funny, we got another comment from Neil referring to lighting the piece on fire, or his experience of making matchstick volcanoes. So I'm really curious, because it's made of matchsticks, I'm just dying to see this piece ignited. What do you think about that?
I mean, if you've got a giant pile of matches, what part of you wouldn't want to see that thing set on fire? And so actually, we've got a great example of an artist who does do that, except they are doing it with gunpowder. So this is the contemporary Chinese artist, I'm totally going to mispronounce this, Chai Guotang. And you can see they're huge pieces that begin as gunpowder, but in order to make the marks on the page, he sets it on fire. And you guys can look up online. There's all kinds of images and videos of these explosions that he creates. And so I think if you really want to make this a complete piece, I mean, that thing is just dying to be lit on fire. I mean, I'd be so interested to see the aftermath of that. Would you like to see that too, Alex?
Yeah, I want to see it before, as we see it now. I want to see it like on ignition. I want to see a film of the burning and then the residue of what's left over. Like, I want to see that whole process. And it's solely from the medium of matchsticks. Like, if this was made with toothpicks, I don't know if I'd have that same inkling. But I gotta say, this is something that this piece is doing really well, is that tension of just really visceral reaction of wanting to see it ignite. Like, it's a house made of matchsticks, and that's a really good emotion that I'm feeling from it.
Moses is saying the piece was so hard to make, it took hours to cut every single match and glue it in. Oh, I do not doubt that for a second. I mean, that is a lot of work to get it to stand up, much less actually stay together. Although part of me, Alex, wants to see the craftsmanship be either crazy impeccable and accurate or more crazy. Right now, for me, it straddles between being almost meticulous, but not quite, especially when you get up into the close-up areas. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I think you said it perfectly, where I either want to see it like this haphazard pile, which would be very exciting to see, or just even more meticulously. When I look at some of the cuts, like, and I don't doubt the care that was taken in them, but sometimes the tool is the thing that you're left with. Like, there are paintings that I've spent hours on, and I figured out afterwards, it's like, man, I really need to replace some of these brushes because it's just, you can tell that the mark is not clear enough. And in these, you can see a lot of the care taken in those matches in the awning, really looking smooth. And then we get to that vertical part of the roof, it's the level starts to get a little unbalanced. And it's those little things where if you're going for that clean cut look, then you need that clean cut.
So, Moses, I'm thinking actually one option you could have explored is, because I'm looking at this process image, it looks like there's like corrugated cardboard that was like underneath to hold up the matchsticks. I know this would have taken an obscene amount of matchsticks, but if the whole thing was only matchsticks, nothing underneath, even the grass, you probably could have, I don't know, chopped up the wood to make it look like grass or something, because that might actually have been easier, even though it probably would have taken longer. Because I feel right now that the sunflowers to me are a big distraction, and I just want to look at the house. I think the house is great. It's such an interesting concept. I love the fence that's around it, but the flowers get in the way for me.
Mm-hmm. And we got a great comment from Oh No Typos that says a big concern to think about with materials that are transformative in some way is how the reason for that material. Are you using it because it's cool? Have you thought about what happens after? And when you bring up the sunflowers, I think this quote really fits because we're all talking about how the matchsticks is, yeah, it's making this reaction and this commentary, and yet the sunflowers being made of clay doesn't quite fit. And I'm looking at them now, and I almost think like, what if you made the sunflowers out of matchsticks as well? You cut off the red igniter as the center bulb and left little scrapes of the wood to be the petals. Like, I think it calls for like all or nothing, because now I'm wondering why the other pieces are made of other materials.
Yeah, so Neil had asked earlier, what are the sunflowers made out of? And Moses replied that the sunflowers are made of clay. And actually, we do have this image, which is a process photo of Moses creating the sunflowers. Yeah, to me, the sunflowers, they're just so out of place. And the fact that they're created out of clay instead of an actual object like the matchsticks, it doesn't quite line up. So I'd be curious, Moses, I don't know if you want to work on this piece more, but what if you went back, took off all the sunflowers, maybe went back in and cleaned up some of those corners in here, got rid of the grass? Maybe that would be really cool, because we got this great comment from W315 who says, yes, there's incredible tension, and having it made of matchsticks, it would make a good illustration about family tensions. Yeah, so I think that's another option. I mean, would you suggest, Alex, that Moses keep working on this?
I'm curious, where it reminds me of, I just picked up knitting and I got 4 hours into a scarf before realizing I messed up very early on. So it's that question of, do you care enough, like where it would bother you if you didn't go back and fix it? Or in the case with me and my scarf, I realized it was better to just start over. So that's something that I'm curious, like, this is one of those where, as looming as that might sound, this could be a really good piece of like learning about the materials and medium. And unsolicited advice time, I just had the thought of, what if you use different kinds of matches? Like, I think of those little match books where the match stick is the very thin paper. How cool would that be as like the foliage and the topography around the house? Just throwing that out there. Do with it what you will. But
and you know, they sell really long matchsticks. Have you seen those? They're like 12 inches long.
Yeah,
I mean, that'd be so cool for the sunflowers.
And that would be stellar for even like the foundation of the house and building that inner structure, making it fully supportable. And then, as I think we're all thinking, then it would be even more satisfying to see it burn.
So Tanley says, I like the sunflower trees. It kind of messes with the perception of scale. Yeah, because sunflowers can be all different sizes. I mean, some of them are massive, and then there's smaller scale ones. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up, Alex, was the architecture. Do you recognize this as a particular time period, or did you even think about that?
It's funny. Once again, get a like horror movie kind of vibe because it does look a little bit like the Amityville Horror House in Connecticut. Yeah, it looks a little bit like that house with that arch, that strange bell-shaped roof, and that kind of center window that looks like an eye. But yeah, beyond that, it doesn't really cry out any specifics.
The only reason I bring it up is that I wonder if getting more specific would help the story. I don't know what the film was about. I don't have any specifics about it, but I know oftentimes with films, the time period is pretty important. Like, okay, is this movie set in today? Is it from the 1920s? And I feel like that's, Moses, maybe a place where you could have done more research, because it's like it doesn't really matter if people recognize it or not. It's just that level of specificity, I think, just makes things have a little bit more power. And by the way, just want to point out that Mark Templin is here with us live in the chat. If you guys missed this, Mark was the scriptwriter on the film and a friend of Moses's. So thank you so much for tuning in, Mark. And we have another comment from Moses who says, the piece was a great lesson in sculpting with cardboard, which is my favorite material, and to use it as a skeleton for various ideas. Very cool. Yeah, I think I want to see you work on this more. I think that it's a piece which has a lot of potential. And then another thing I was thinking about too is, Alex, if you look at this view, I'm not sure I like the square base. What do you think?
I don't mind the square base because it kind of fits with that rigid suburban structure. However, I do kind of wish that there was a fencing around it to really emphasize the square. Right now, I think what bothers me about it is that it just kind of stops at behind and in front. And if there was a more encompassing, this is the complete piece, I think that would really help it. But I don't mind that it's square. In fact, I think it helps it.
I'm going to disagree and say that I think that it's fine for it to have this very geometric planned base, because that is what you expect to see in the suburbs. Like everything's lined up and everything. But again, it's like, I wish, Moses, that you could do that research and find a suburban neighborhood, because there are certain things in suburbs, like there's always a driveway, there's always a backyard. And so I feel like this is the beginning, and you could definitely build off of this, because you have a lot of great things going on here. I just think that you haven't thought about how to make the piece more cohesive. Like, you got all these great pieces and parts, but right now for me, they're not totally holding together. Go ahead.
Yeah, we just got a comment coming in. Another one from Oh No Typos, also exploring lighting. The light box makes it feel very generic in a way. Playing with the lighting would help give the house more character or personality. And even between just these two shots, one with that heavy shadow coming over it, and then the other one that's more front on with a lot of light, look at how the mood is so different with those. And that's the one where, again, back to the artist statement, I wish that that was the area that I want more clarity on with the subject of the film and the manner of the poster. Is this supposed to invoke those feelings of foreboding? I think it is, but just to make sure, that's something that the lighting can definitely help to complete that message.
We have a question from Neil who says, when you receive two opposite points of view from a critique, how do you know who to follow? That's great, because we just did that. So, Alex, what do you do? Like, you pulled in two different directions.
That's always the best, because then it's back to the artist to make that informed decision. It's one of those cool things where, yes, there are rules in art and there are right and wrong ways to go about things, but it's also still the element of opinion and subjectivity in art. So it's really cool to think about why you as the artist make these decisions, because no one is ever going to like everything 100%. Two equally talented or knowledgeable artist could disagree completely.
I think, Neil, what I would do, think about the 2 points of view and think about the reasons why they said that. Alex said, well, I think it fits suburbia because it's square. I said, yes, but you need to get more specific. And you have to ask yourself, does that matter? Because you're right, you can't listen to everybody. You have to, at some point, make a choice about where you're going to take the artwork. If you guys would like to submit a single artwork to be critiqued here live on YouTube, go to artprof.org and you want to click on Art Critiques. You will see a green button where you can submit for a free live critique, and this will take you to the submission form. So if you want to be considered, we'd love to see the work you guys are making. Okay, the second artwork is by Anthony Zhang, and it's titled Crumple. It's a polymer clay piece, about 12 inches by 9 inches. And I'm going to read a little bit from Anthony's artist statement. You can read the whole thing in the video description below. So Anthony is a high school student, mostly working in sculpture and photography. And Anthony says, usually I work with earthenware, but this was made during the pandemic, so I had to settle for polymer clay. Anthony says, I chose to make flowers because of their innate delicacy and vibrant coloring. And Anthony used multi-chrome pigments, which creates this lovely effect that you guys can see in the sculpture. And Anthony says the inspiration was a sort of self-portrait of how I view my sexuality as an inherent part of me that is beautiful in all its glory, but has been, quote, harmed in the past, hence the actual crumple. First impressions, Alex.
First impression is honestly blown away that it's made of polymer clay. The thinness of it, the detail of it. And then we're not the only ones who are wowed by we're going to need you to repeat the clay again, because we're getting a question from Neil of how can you make clay this shiny? My first glimpse of it was that it was pieces of metal. So yeah, how can you make clay this shiny?
I don't know, Alex, but Anthony says in the statement, I chose the multi-chrome pigments. We can try to Google that. And if Anthony, you're here live in the chat, we would love an explanation, because I really don't have experience in that area. But tell us in the chat, how many of you guys have worked with polymer clay before? And if you have, what's challenging about it? Because I find it really hard to work with. Have you ever used it, Alex?
I've dabbled with it a little bit. And it's just so hard for me to escape the sense in my head of like, this is clay. And I use it any project I've made with it has been very thick, very like solid, kind of like sculpture, of course, sculpture based, but a little more meaty. It hasn't been this thin, this delicate, this intricate with all this detail incorporated. This is something I've been very timid to try with clay.
My problem with polymer clay is just really floppy. It's hard to get it to do anything without having an armature inside. But you can see, because these are flower petals, they don't have, well, I'm going to guess they don't have armatures. They look thin enough that they probably wouldn't. Also, most polymer clays are baked. And so usually if you bake around an armature, it causes the polymer clay to crack, which is no good. So I guess we're just blown away by the delicacy in terms of how Anthony has been handling the clay, because wow, there's a lot of textures too. Like, do you see those like textures at the bottom, Alex? I mean, those are beautiful. What do you think?
Yeah, it's balanced so well, which leads me, I think, to one of my biggest critiques about the piece is crumple, which I'm seeing none of. And even in the artist statement, the concept that the crumble is referencing to some hurt, I am seeing none of that in this piece. And I don't know if that's a problem. It's just a problem of intent versus result. This is a very beautiful, celebratory, delicate image. And I don't see that crumbling happening in it. Instead, and I think somebody pointed this out really well. Emma Chapman Lynn is saying, wow, how this was assembled, it seems impossibly suspended. Excellent work. And yeah, to me, the reverse of crumbling, I see it as floating, as kind of ethereal. So what do you think about some of those thoughts?
Well, I love what Emma said about the gravity, because I think oftentimes with sculptures, I think about where is the weight Where's the weight being distributed? Okay. And in this piece, I don't really see weight. Like, I sort of feel like everything's floating. And that seems crazy that Anthony was able to achieve that with actual three-dimensional material. And I think a lot of that is coming from the negative space that's underneath the sculpture, that we can go underneath it and up. A lot of sculptures aren't like that. A lot of sculptures, they're just flat on the table. You don't have that opportunity. So I suspect that that's one of the reasons why that's starting to happen. But yeah, getting back to the title, I think that it just seems totally unrelated to the image itself. I mean, Anthony does say in the statement, as an inherent part of me that is beautiful in all its glory. We see that part of it, but the part about being harmed in the past. So it seems like this piece is more about the present, but we need some indication of the past. Do you think?
Again, I think it, like I said, I don't think it fits the artist statement, but I don't think that's a problem, except when intent comes in. I think that as it is now, I think it's a very cool presentation of, and the presence of sexuality is interesting, where somebody else pointed out that the flowers are the reproductive organs of plants. I'm trying to find, it was W315 who was saying that. And it's a really cool point where it's such a subtle nod into the concept behind this piece. And the beautiful colors is really helping to make it that much more exciting and unique. So yeah, I don't know if it needs that presence of crumple within this piece. I think it's something that can be changed about what this piece currently means.
I do think, though, that if I didn't have the artist statement, I don't think I would make any connection with sexuality, which is odd because flowers are oftentimes used to communicate sexual themes and ideas. But to me, these don't really do that. I saw them more as decorative. They're beautiful pieces, but the sexuality part doesn't come across. And on top of that, it's a pretty vague theme saying how I view my sexuality. Like, don't you think we need to get more specific? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, my first thought that comes in, if you want to still ride like the subtlety train, is bees. The inclusion of bees within the flowers could, one, be a very fun thing to sculpt, but also be a little bit more explicit with the subtlety of the presence of sexuality in the pollination of the bees within it. It would continue the metaphor. Because yeah, right now it is just simply like flowers, period. There's nothing suggesting more without the artist statement.
Well, I mean, probably the artist who's most famous for showing flowers as sexual images, probably Georgia O'Keeffe. If you guys have seen her large paintings of flowers, I mean, the way she frames it, they always look very much like female genitalia. And so I don't know that Anthony needs to go that far necessarily, but I feel like right now it's just pretty. And the thing is, to me, the artist statement is not just about being pretty, it's about being harmed. And so part of me wonders, actually, because we have this copper tooling tutorial, one of the things that we demonstrate in this tutorial is how to do the patination. And Anthony has their patination. But also, if you look at the copper, so it starts out like this. It's all bright and shiny and everything. And then we go through, we put a patina on. But then beyond that, Annalise, who runs this tutorial, she actually sands the surface of the copper. And so you end up with this textured surface. I mean, I'm just sort of wondering, Alex, like maybe like a little sanding here and there could give it that little bite to talk about that past. What do you think?
Oh yeah, potentially. And the example with the copper is perfect because it almost looks like the copper survived some sort of like burn and the shine is coming through despite that, which is a really powerful visual metaphor for overcoming that hardship. Which, again, now in this piece, it seems so much more just a simple celebration of the present. And I'm really curious about how far you want to push, because I'm very excited about the challenge of making a piece about sexuality and maintaining its subtlety. Where, don't get me wrong, I think overt sexuality in art is a very powerful form. But it makes me think of a kooky painting that my uncle did years and years ago. and it was hanging in his home. And he said, "That's my first memory." And what it is it's a bright red circle with a bunch of like tentacle things coming out of the corners of the painting. And it's an image of an egg and the spermatozoa going towards the egg. But it looks like just like a red sun. And it's a very funny tongue-in-cheek painting of his of something that's subtly displayed still. So I'm curious about how far you want to explore that and how overt you want to get as well.
I think that's a great point. So what I'd recommend to Anthony is deciding further in advance, how subtle do I want the idea to be? But the issue with being subtle is that it can be so subtle that it just goes over people's heads. That's what's really hard about it. Erica saying maybe some distortion in the flowers can work in the harming concept. And Elizabeth says color can be achieved through added colors to the clay, prevailing, and by painting after. Also adding mica helps with the luster. I don't know about any of this stuff, but it all sounds great. So Alex, maybe the thing to do would be to do like test flowers, make a couple small ones that you just try a lot of things on. You try the mica, you try the sanding, you different patinations. Maybe more experimentation there is needed.
Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, maybe matchsticks are the answer again. Like, what if the clay with the presence of fire? I know just in my experience with polymer clay, if a piece is made too thin and it bakes too long, then it just gets scorched. So again, that could be something intentionally used visually.
Pkmn says, do some of the flowers have meaning, like the language of flowers? That's such a great question, because flowers, they're always used as, I mean, it's such a cliche like that. Oh, this flower means this, this, and this. I mean, I think that's a great idea to think about. Well, do these flowers have any personal connection to the artist? Doing deeper research, I think, would be terrific. What do you think, Alex?
Oh, yeah. And that brings up a funny point, too, of I almost love contentedly the idea that the flowers do have meaning to the artist, that they weren't just random flowers. But we as viewers don't need to know that. That's part of that thing of the purpose of art is to heal and that self-expression. And we don't need to know every detail about the message of the flowers. I hope that there's meaning behind them. And yeah, when you say more research, I'm thinking more obviously with flowers, like flowers and life and plant life grows from the mulch and the soil and the earth, which is fueled by previously dead flowers. So I think incorporating more of the plant cycle of life could bring more to it rather than just the present of the flower, just that springtime.
Yeah, we've got a lot of people commenting about the life cycle of a flower because it does change dramatically. Like Emily saying, maybe if there were flowers in later stages of blooming, wilting, it would show the damage. Or Neil says some petals falling. W315 says also flower buds. And Tom G is saying maybe one black flower buried under the color. And I love this. Neil says the ecology of flowers too. Mm-hmm. Different kinds of flowers grow in different places. So you could say, for example, maybe the flower has a personal connection because it's a flower that grows in your home country. Maybe your family member had a flower garden and they always planted this every year. So I think that this is something to think about, because my feeling right now is that this piece really grabs me visually. Like, how can you not want to look at this? It's shiny, it's full of colors, it's beautifully made, but I don't know that it invites an investigation beyond that. What do you think?
Yeah, and we're getting still more chats talking about like that secret language of flowers too. And I urge you to also, there's still safe places to go in the pandemic because they're outdoors, going to a botanic gardens if there's one near you, or even like a garden shop where you can just walk down the rows of the different flowers. And if you're intrigued by one, it's fun to explore and look up where they got their current meanings, or where this flower got the meaning of friendship. And exploring those could be a great way to fuel later pieces of yours.
Ipque says the complication of piling up the flowers and yet separation of individual flowers makes the work lonely, even in its brief moment of beauty. Well, this is a great comment because I do feel that the flowers are just sort of lined up. There's not a lot of three-dimensional interaction, and some of them feel like they're just pressed on top of each other. Like, I think it would be cool if Anthony played with the direction that the flowers are pointing in. Like, maybe one's really going up, maybe one is overlapping another. Like, I feel that it could be a more sculptural form.
Yeah, it's funny. I see it as more, I saw it as almost like a crown structure. So I didn't mind that the flowers were kind of lopped on top of each other in that placed way. But now that you say that, yeah, like, why does it have to be in this arched structure? It would be really cool to see it go wild with its growth, or going back to the original artist intent with the statement, or to really invoke that sense of crumbling. It would be really tight to kind of make that structure work rather than this kind of blooming structure.
I mean, Anthony, I don't know how you planned this piece, but one thing a lot of sculptors do is they make something called a maquette, which is basically a three-dimensional thumbnail sketch. It's like a little model to plan out some of the forms in advance. And so you could even make a maquette out of paper if you don't want to waste the clay just to figure out the arrangement. I find that very, very helpful. Trina is saying, is it okay for the artist applying to studio arts to make an accessory or something wearable as a 3D piece in their portfolio? Absolutely. In fact, I think this really makes you stick out if you're applying to art school. Don't you think, Alex?
Oh, yeah. Like, absolutely. And don't be worried about it not being on brand, because in applying for art school, it's still the thing where you need to show your passion and your drive and your skill set. You don't need to present them like, this is me, a finished artist. I don't need to go to art school. Like, that's, no, of course not. So show your breadth and your skill set.
We have an Art Prof share today. Art Prof share is where one of you guys makes an artwork in response to one of our videos. And the Art Prof share today is by Demi Landman, who worked on a jelly plate to create this print. And so you can see in Demi's statement, they say that they'd known about jelly plates before, but didn't really understand what they would be used for. And so the video that Demi watched is this one on jelly plate printmaking, which is so fun and so accessible. And you can do monotypes, this process, without needing a professional printing press. Like, when I found out about this, I was like, whoa, like my brain exploded. And you can see here's a still of me holding the plate. They're fun. They're like floppy and like jelly-like and everything. And you roll ink on it, and then you can remove and you can paint on top of it. So it creates just beautiful textures. So basically, Demi says that they appreciated that they could go with the flow, lose themselves in the details, and you don't have to spend 5 hours on the thing. And so this is a new way of printmaking that Demi recently discovered. What do you think about Demi's piece, Alex?
I think it's so rad, and I'm most proud of the intention of exploring the new media with the subject matter, because the texture that's invoked from this jelly print technique is so fitting to the fungi and the different textures and the different parts of the mushroom cap. So it's a really cool way to really instantly show what this medium can do.
Yeah, and really the strength of a jelly plate, it's in the variety of texture and especially the direction of the stroke. I mean, I love the mushroom caps. They're textured, they're volumetric, and even the background has this like speckled version. And if we go back to the original image, you can see how well integrated all those different textures come together, and yet you don't lose the mushrooms. Sometimes that happens. I think people get all into the texture, and then you look at it and you're like, ah, crap, where's the mushrooms?
Yeah.
They're totally gone. So I just think that's wonderful that Demi was able to do that. If you guys would like to show us what you're making, you can go to artprof.org, click on tutorials. There's a purple button for you to submit your Art Prof share. Just fill out this form. We love seeing what you guys make. Or if you want to just tag us on Instagram, art.prof, use hashtag ArtProfShare. We would love to see it and share with everybody on our Instagram stories. ArtProf has a podcast. It's available on Spotify and also on iTunes. In a few minutes, Alex and I will be hanging out in the ArtProf Discord in the post live streams channel. So we'd love to see you guys over there. Subscribe to our channel and join the ArtProf family. And we want to give a big shout out to our top Patreon supporters who give us the resources we need to keep ArtProf 100% free and accessible to everybody. And thank you guys so much for watching and contributing all of your comments and ideas, and to Moses and Anthony for sharing their work with us. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.